setting up the draft view of the counter block and taper collar. Remember to always open your template as its own part file. You never want to reference the template into your model file, because if you reference the template into your model file, you get the border and the title block, but you do not get any of the defaults that come with it. The line sizing, arrowhead sizing, text sizing, anything that you might have, that I set up in the template, or you might have set up in the template, that won't come into your model. So always open up the template file on its own. It has all the defaults in it, and then you reference the model into it. So we're going to open up the template. This should be the inch template, because the taper collar and counter block were both in inches. And I'm going to bring in the counter block part. Now it's vertically oriented and a little bit too large. I'm going to drop it, click to drop it, escape out, then I'm going to double click on the boundary file here and go to angle, rotate it clockwise, which is -90 degrees, and then I want to make it somewhat smaller so I have room to put all my dimensions on it. So we'll go to general scale. Let's try 1 to 2. That's too small. So we'll go to the ratio setting and pick something in between, like, let's see, 1 to, let's try, you can always scale it down after you put dimensions in, unlike in previous versions of NX when that'd mess up all your sizing. So that's the size we want. Just for chuckles, we can bring in the isometric of it, and to get the center lines off, click and drag a box around the whole thing, hit your delete key. There we go. You may notice at times that you get these edge lines that really shouldn't be there. There's no corner or anything there. You can delete those by right clicking and hitting the little eyeball here, the hide symbol. That looks a little better. You could actually do that to any of the lines. Normally the isometric comes in fairly accurately, but there are some problems depending on how you create the part. At times you may or may not get a line and a curved edge. It comes in with center lines. This center line not quite big enough. Let's double click. We want that center line to be as large as the counter bore. And there are no center lines on this slot because it doesn't put center lines in for arcs. So we're going to go to the center line command, go to center mark. You can do more than one at a time. If you do more than one at a time, it connects them. Okay, so there we go with that. And now, since this is a sectioning chapter, you always want to figure out when the part is done, what's the fewest number of views and the best views to use to show this in order to dimension it. If you don't know, you can put a bunch of views on there, use the best views to put your dimensions in, and any views that you didn't need to put dimensions in, then obviously you don't need, you can delete them afterwards. We're going to go to the section view command and just put a full section through the whole thing. Click to drop it down here. This shows my internal parts and my external. You're not supposed to dimension to hidden lines, so no hidden lines in this view. Let's move this down a little bit. Here's my tolerance note. The tolerance note was put on your template so that to remind you to put a tolerance note in. So let's double click on that. Let's get rid of the top here. We don't need to edit tolerance note, a reminder. And the tolerance should be no preceding 0 for inches, as explained in the video on the basics of dimension placement. Typically with inches we have 2 significant digits, and this shouldn't say inches, it should say, or shouldn't say units, it should say inches. So there's a good way to put a tolerance note in. The letters for the cutting plane line should be near the arrowheads. And you can move if the arrowhead gets in your way, you can double click on it, and that little yellow dot there, you can click and drag it and move this in and out, so get it away from any other dimension lines. There's a way to shorten the arrowhead too. I forget, you might have to double click, right click, maybe go to settings, probably in there somewhere. Lots of changes you can make. We might come back and move this if it gets in our way. Okay, let's put some dimensions in. So we should start with, here's our rapid dimension. A rapid dimension will do a normal linear dimension that's horizontal or vertical. It'll do angular or radial or diametral. It'll do all of these depending on what information you give it. Sometimes it won't want to snap or click or give you the correct one, and then you'll have to force it. So there's a couple ways to do that, but we'll use the rapid most of the time here. Okay, we need to put the height here. So it's on diametral by default from last time I used it. This should be on inferred. Okay, this is how you can change it to if you want a radius, even when it's trying to give you a diameter, then you can change the method here. Usually you want it on inferred. So I'm going to click here and here. You click where you want the gap to start. Okay, the gap size length has already been predetermined. We're not going to put the height of this counter bore here because we're going to put it in the note on the top. This just happens to be the same height, 1.4 inches is over there. This corner is at the same height as there, but we don't put it there. No, we don't assume, make assumptions with dimensioning. So that's the height there. We do the length of the bottom here. Now to do an angle, you can either identify both edges of the angle, and that identifies where it should be, or you can do the length to one edge and then do an angle of that line, and then you wouldn't need the top dimension here. Let's see, we also need one here. I would put this dimension in instead of it across the top view, because this is on the contour where you can easily see what you're actually dimensioning across. And we need a dimension across here. Usually these dimensions are lined up, so if you go over there, you can click on that, not click on it, it'll automatically link to it, and then you can move your dimension back. Usually you want the dimensions lined up unless you need more room, but make them neat. Remember, dimensions are there to be easily read and understood. Remember, you're locating and sizing every feature, so the slot here we have to locate and size it. So we're going to locate it by arcs or centers of circles are always located to the center of the circle. Okay, that dimension is a little crowded there. We'll come back and edit that later. Go to the center line here. The center line is also on the midpoint line, so either one will work. Again, that's a little crowded, but we will come back and fix that later. We could then go from, we have to know the other point here. So there we go. Now notice this window comes up. This is like a small editor. And it comes up when you just hover for a few seconds, and then you can add features to this. And just ignore it if you don't need it, but if you want it, we'll get to something when we need it in just a minute here. Okay, we also want to locate the center hole here. Now, it looks like it's centered. This hole looks like it's centered from top to bottom, but we don't take anything for granted. So we're going to, let's go from here to here. This isn't how it was dimensioned in the book. exactly. They said, you know, 0.2 between the center line and this edge. Remember, in the book they were just giving you enough information, dimensional information, for you to model it. So we're going to go from the outside edge to this edge line, and then from the outside edge to that line. Subtract the two and you have the distance across. Now, where's the center of the hole? Do we know where that is? Well, it looks like we know where it is, but let's be specific. Let's actually tell it. And I'm just going to drop it in here anywhere. Sometimes it doesn't like to, it wants to click on some other dimension. If you just drop it somewhere, you can move it later. There's a way to turn off this snapping function. I'm not sure where that went anymore in these later versions. So just zoom in and be careful with it. There we go. Usually the text, you want the text is centered between the arrowheads. The first dimension out from the side should have some room, shouldn't be crowding the object line. And then you should stack the other dimensions, you know, you can stack them fairly close together. Be uniform in their placement. Okay, we actually have 3 lines here and 3 gaps, and this extension line is too close to that arc. If you zoom in, you can see the gap, but when you print it out or zoom out, it looks like it's touching. So we're going to fix that right now. We're going to double click on the line and then click on the square dot here, and then you can take the arrowhead and move it out. We're just going to move it out here because there's another line underneath it. We're going to do the same thing for the next one. Double click on it, click on that, and just click on the arrow then. I love these editing features that are graphical. Okay, the last one is there, and we're going to double click on that and click on here. Now really we don't need to move. If we move this one out, it moves the other one too. We don't want to move both. So there's this thing here where the gap and it has a synchronize both sides button. You want to turn that off. Turn it on, turn it off. Okay, and then it should just move one side. So that the gap here from the curve looks about the same distance as up there. And then you can close that. So it's nice to be able to edit that in real time. What is that line there? Oh, okay. Why I did that. Let's double click on that. Don't know why that moved that way. I'm just going to delete that line. I don't know if I moved it. Oh, I see. Okay, I'm just going to delete that and put it back in. Sometimes the easiest way to edit something is just to delete it, especially if you don't know how you messed it up to begin with. So let's try it again. Let's try there to here. And we got to move that one. There we go. Neatness counts, people. Neatness counts. Easy to read, easy to understand. Okay, we need an overall. You start with the smaller dimensions and you keep going outward until you get larger and larger, until you get an overall width, length, and height. So do we have an overall height? No, we do not have an overall height yet. So let's go from here to here and give it overall height. Oh, I'm missing a center line here. So let's go to center line. That's a 2D center line. We can go from curves, okay. Pick 2 lines. It puts a center line down between them. Don't let that center line hit text if you need to move it, shorten it. Okay, we need to size and locate this hole here. So let's locate it. Highlight the center line in this edge. We'll drop that dimension in. And then the height of it, typically you take the dimension and move it out to the nearest outside edge. instead of dragging it all the way through the part over here. That probably wouldn't be too busy either. And then we need to size it. So to size it with a rapid dimension, if you just click on the arc, it should do a, I'm going to go diametral. Usually I like to just have a leader line pointing in and not a diametral line pointing across. If sometimes, because if you get several of these things in one spot, it looks kind of weird. I'm going to try that one more time. Diametral inferred. Okay, that's what I usually want right there. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to use this little editor here. By default, your text is either unidirectional, which means it's all upright, or it's bidimensional. It's either vertical text, horizontal text dimension lines, and the text is horizontal or vertical like this. And if you have vertical text over here, then it's angled, so the bottom of the text is to the right, which means it aligns with the leader line too, and we want to straighten this out. So we're going to go right here to text align and make it horizontal text. There we go. Click to drop that, escape out. We can delete this one then. My little tab line here is maybe I have that adjusted too long. If you double click on this, you can click and drag this in, but where it's set is okay. Remember, your leader line can cross an extension line, but it's not supposed to cross another dimension line. Put it somewhere where it's easy to read. There, we've sized and located that hole. We have not sized this slot yet, so let's do that. Let's click. Do we want a radial for that? Yeah, let's do a radial. And then we want to go up here and straighten it out. And in front of this radial, hover for a second, go up here. In front of this is the text. The x.xx represents the text. And we want 2 of these, so 2x. If you need more significant digits, you can change this value. Now this is called the text in the center here. The other stuff is called, so we're going to drop that right about there. There, we've now sized and located the slot. Now let's make this a little more legible. There's 2 ways to do this. Double click on that text. You can either right click on it and say text or arrowhead orientation out. That gives you a little more room in between the extension lines. Or you can click on the text and move it outside. Typically, if you want to move it outside, you'd have the arrows inside though. Okay. So since I have room inside, I usually like my text inside the extension lines. Same thing for this one. For this one, the other option is to take and move it to the outside like that. That's okay also. Okay, now we can move this in a little bit. Move my text nice and neat. Move my arrowhead where I can see it. Am I missing anything? Is there any feature that I do not have there? Oh, okay. The only thing I don't have is these arcs here. So instead of dimensioning it, I'm going to put a note in like they showed in the book. And the note is going to say, all fillets and rounds, radius 0.40. I think that's what it was. Let's say that's what it was. There, so now you have a note. So a fully dimensioned drawing shows pictures, shows dimensions, shows notes, shows tolerance notes. And anything else about the part that you need to let the person know that's going to build this thing, like is the part, if there's a particular material it's got to be made out of, like aluminum or stainless steel, then you'd put the type of steel, material, and you'd list that. If it's painted or has decals applied, and you can even tell what the font of the detail, what the font of the letters on the decal are. Okay, so anything that the person needs to know, it should be on this drawing. This is a working drawing, a legal document that should be complete in and of itself, or reference other sheets it may need. So that's what your counter block should look like. Yep, I'm going to move this dimension down a little bit. That boundary line, that yellow boundary line, never prints out, so don't worry about, you can ignore that. There we go. Now, are there other ways to dimension this? Yes, there are. If I had another note here, let me put another note. Let's say I had more than one note, so I could say note 1, and then note 2. If I said the part is symmetrical, part is symmetrical about cutting plane line. Okay, what does that tell us? That says the part is symmetrical about the cutting plane line. Well, here's the cutting plane line. That means that it's just as far to this side as that side. Now, what that tells us is now that the part is symmetrical, which means the hole is in the center of this plane. If the hole is in the center of that plane, top to bottom, then I don't need this dimension because I know it's halfway through and it's 3 inches, wide. I also don't need this dimension, because if it's 1.3 inches to this side, it's also 1.3 inches from the top side there. Okay? I also don't need this dimension, because if it's 0.6 to this arc center, it's also 0.6 from the other arc center. And if there were more features on this that were symmetrical, you can see that just having a note can keep me from having to put a lot of dimensions on if it was a lot more complicated part. So notes can be very handy. There's no one right way to do dimensioning. As long as it's clear and gets the information across, it's okay. When a person wants to build this part, he should be reading all the dimensions, he should be reading all the notes. Okay. Oh, we're missing a couple more dimensions here. We're missing this hole in that counter bore. Because there's no line across here, we know that the counter bore is the same depth as this slot. So if we put the depth of the slot in, we have the depth of the counter bore, and vice versa. Let me go inferred. We're going to put the dimension of this in here. And I'm going to go to straighten it out there. And then I'm going to go to the full editor now because I need some symbols. So this is the small edit. I call it the small editor, I guess. And this is the full editor. So in the full editor, when you open it, probably the symbols will be closed here. You can do different things here. Formatting, you can make it bold. This is how you change the size of the text if you want to change the size different. It's scalable. So right now it's at 1. If you want to make it double size, you say 2. All the text should be the same size. The only time you want to increase the size of text is if you wanted to put the say top view here, put the view title. The titles are usually bold and they're a little bigger than the rest of the text. But what we're going to do is here we're going to add, this is called appended text. This is the text, the dimension, and then anything you add to it is called appended text. So we're going to go for the appended text, we're going to say below it, and then we're going to type in what we want. And we want a symbol for counter bore and a diameter. And that counter bore diameter is 1.60. Probably how they would create this part is to drill the first hole, 0.60, drill it through, then put a counter bore it, and then somehow cut the slot in. CNC machine could do that. Okay, we're going to do enter here, and for the second line of appended text, we're going to say depth 0.40, oops, 0.40, and say close. And then position this thing where it's not in the way. We also want a dimension from here to this center line, because we can't assume that this hole is on this plane halfway from left to right. It looks like it is, but we don't make assumptions. Okay, now we got a crowding problem here. So let's move this over here. There. If this is in your way, you could move this down too. You want it easy to read and understand. Okay, we have the depth of this counterbore, so that we don't need the depth of this now because we have the depth listed there. There. Don't forget to change your title block here. Put your name, full name, your section number. This could be should be week 7, assignment 1. And if you save the whole thing, file, save, save as, save it to your U drive and name it, you know, your full name, section number, and counter block would be a good name. And then send me the PDF of it. So file, export, PDF. This PDF file will have 2 sheets in it, this and a taper collar. So you'd create the name that you want to call it. You know, this should be called your full name, your section number, and then week 7 assignment 1, W7A1, and then call it, you know, section views or whatever, and put that in your U drive. That PDF file is then ready to append the taper collar to it. Okay, just to make these videos a little bit shorter, I'm going to create the taper collar in the next video.